Recorder is on. Let's take it away.
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining this session. The title is self-explanatory. We're going to have an open discussion about how to add Nephio and ONAP to the 5G super blueprint and what value it might bring. If you joined us in the first half of this day, you've heard that there's a lot going on in terms of integrating pieces of ONAP and Nephio together with the 5G super blueprint to bring value. And the purpose of this meeting, of this session, is to kind of follow up on something that started in the previous DNTF. So in February, Amar from ARNA presented some high-level ideas about how pieces of Nephio and ONAP can be used to enrich the functionality of the 5G super blueprint. And it was kind of a brainstorming session, but it's probably time for 4 months later to move it into more pragmatic track and kind of see how we can make this thing happen. So I was hoping Amar or someone from ARNA can quickly walk us through what was discussed in the previous DNTF. Then I can share what are the thoughts around the 5G super blueprint about where we want to see more integration and more growth, and hopefully we can understand where Nephio is with regards to orchestrating mobile packet core in the form of free 5GC, and here talk about what ONAP functionality can be brought into the super blueprint, and then discuss how it can be integrated and hopefully get some next steps and action items. So I see some Brendan is on the call, so I don't know if there's anyone from ARNA who can walk us through the previous session.
Hey, Randy. Yeah, Mar's just getting back from a long PTO. I'm trying to get a hold of him now to see if he can join. Maybe he can join for the latter half of the session.
Okay, so I'll do my best to kind of recap what was discussed. So Amar and Yogan were discussing the history of how the 5G super blueprint current implementation came about, but what's more important, I think they brought up the idea of using Nephio to do two things. One is related to what we heard about earlier today, is using the O2 interface to control the ORAN part of the 5G super blueprint, and the other part was about using Nephio to orchestrate the mobile packet core, which in this example is SD core is shown, but we know that both the current implementation of the 5G super blueprint and release 1 of Nephio were more focused around free 5GC, which may be good enough as a starting point. Here are some ideas about what could be the added functionality to the 5G super blueprint. So again, what was discussed earlier today, this FOCM functionality of the SMO and controlling the O2 interface, the control of the mobile packet core, orchestration of a mobile packet core, and orchestrating then the CNFs themselves, especially on the radio side. Then there's the functionality related to network slicing, which is probably where ONAP can bring some assets. Yeah, and then the O1 interface is also an option, an optional functionality. So yeah, this is in a nutshell what was discussed earlier this year, and I hope you see the right screen, to kind of just give you an idea of where we want to see the 5G Super Blueprint growing. What you see here is that maybe three main areas where we want to see evolution. Starting from the top is, of course, addition of Nephio, ONAP, and richer orchestration to the blueprint. Then, as I briefly mentioned, currently the blueprint uses free 5GC, but it seems like SD Core offers a richer set of functionality. And the last thing is the move from a proprietary ORAN implementation that exists today in the 5G Super Blueprint, mostly coming from GXC, GenXCom. And as pieces of the ORAN are becoming available in the form of open source, we want to see transition to the inclusion of these parts. As most of you know, not all the ORAN architecture modules are available in the form of open source. So DSMO, of course, there are a few options. RICs have good implementation from the ORAN software community, so does the DU. But when it comes to CU and the RU, it's mostly these days proprietary implementations, and there aren't very good reference implementations of open source one, at least not ones with permissive license. So we know about OAI and others, but those are have very restrictive licenses and are not the type of open source that can be generally used and redistributed by all the interested parties. Any questions about the 5G Super Blueprint and where it's going?
I think Gergely just asked one on chat.
Yes,
about the role of Anakit RI2 in the infrastructure layer.
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think that we showing Anuket here is a bit also on the side of kind of our future intentions. So the current infrastructure is we have two labs, UNH and the Kalum lab, and as far as I know, the infrastructure implementation is maybe loosely following Anuket, but I'm not sure it ever passed any certification or any more strict compliance with Anuket. So the idea in the 5G Super Blueprint is it's a community effort, and we welcome any input from our LFN communities and broader communities. So if folks from the Anuket community are willing to participate and make sure that the infrastructure is compliant or following the architecture of Anuket, then that would be welcome.
And just to follow up on that, I am not sure exactly what, as what Randy said, like what's installed, sort of on these pods at UNH at the moment, I believe is meant to be, generally Anuket sort of compliant. I know that for one of our proofs of concept that we did, not the one for last year's One Summit, but the one for the previous year's One Summit, we did have Anuket deployed in the lab for part of the infrastructure, but maybe not for all of it. But to reiterate Randy's point, we haven't had a lot of participation from the Anuket community in this initiative. And that's really made it a little bit challenging to work through truly incorporating Anuket into the sort of deployed bits on the actual pods at UNH. So we'd really like to see this improve. This is aspirational right now, but aspiration means it is our goal, which is maybe meant to inspire you, Gergely, and the Anuket community to get more involved as well.
Yes, okay, thank you. I was just hoping that like showing it on the slide means that it is actually integrated. We have RI2 running in lab.
Yeah, I mean, this slide, just to be clear, it's more about where we want to see the 5G super blueprint go. As I mentioned, Nephio itself is not yet integrated, and SD core exists in one of the labs, not the other. But so this is kind of an aspirational slide, not necessarily a snapshot of what exists today. Okay, so
it's Wimmy, do you want to give? I can give you a sense where Nephio is right now in with respect to it, or you want to do that later?
no, yeah, that's thanks, Wim. That's a good
Okay.
segue. I would appreciate maybe if you can share with the people on the call where Nephio is with free 5GC, so we can figure out what of it might be valuable for the 5G super blueprint.
Yeah, so first of all, we also added, okay, so we have a bit of cluster cluster provisioning as well as part of R1. Now we focus at the moment on kind clusters because of our development environment, but we use cluster API as a way to, as the way that we act upon, right? So cluster API is the one that actually instantiates the cluster. So we are just driving cluster API with a set of primitives. So that's one. So I don't know which kind of cluster manager or orchestration you are using. There needs to be something there to accommodate for that. But given that we have done cluster API, there's a broad range of options that you can enable through that. Although probably there will be specific things that need to be looked at to extend that to that specific environment. For example, you could do bare metal, right? Or you could do cloud, right? So all the major cloud providers are in there, right? But we haven't, so the only one that we are really exercising at the moment is the Docker provider, if you will, and kind clusters that sit underneath. Okay, so we could, so I mean, for me, the timing is a bit, is good potentially. Of course, we have to discuss it within the Nephio community, but they are focusing on what would be the next phase or what would be the additional things that we can do. So for me, that's my personal view, is that these clusters is kind of not a huge job to add, of course, depending on, of course, all the dependencies that you have with them. But for example, just to give you a sense, the kind clusters we integrated within 1 or 2 weeks, because it was kind of a bit of a stretch goal. So it was really at the end of the progress when we started to build our testbed that we said, okay, let's automate a cluster. And then we pulled that together within a couple of weeks. So that's, so just to give you a sense of the capabilities there, because we are not, Nephio itself will not, it's similar to the free 5GC. We are not going to build, let's say, the lower layers. So we are going to consume one of them. So the question here is cluster API the right one, and what flavor of it would you use? So I think that would be a question on that side. With respect to, I don't know whether we want to have that debate right now, or otherwise I'll jump into free 5GC.
Yeah, LJ, do you know if someone from either UNH or Kalum is on the call and can provide more details about the type of cluster API that's available?
I don't see either on the participants list, so it doesn't look like they're not on. It doesn't look like they're on.
Okay, so maybe I don't know, LJ, I would appreciate if you take some notes. So that would be probably one of them to follow up and figure out what kind of infrastructure is used exactly.
Yeah, we got the recording. Yeah.
Sorry, one
So
question.
that's one. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
You mentioned that there are different dialects of the cluster API. What do you mean on that?
So cluster API has an abstraction layer, but there are several provider implementations within cluster API, right? So there is a provider, for example, for bare metal. There is a provider for Docker. So there's a provider for OpenStack, for example. There's a provider for VMware. There's a provider for Google Cloud. There's a provider for Azure. So the one we are exercising at the moment is Docker, and underneath Docker there's a kind implementation. So that's the one that we are exercising. So in other words, if we want to have another flavor, so for example, just to give you a sense of what we are doing when we talk about cluster automation. So based on the previous presentation that was done by the people from Wind River, right? So for the O-Clouds, so there is a management cluster, and there is then the edge clusters, if you will, right? So we are talking about the instantiation of the what we call workload cluster, whether it's for us, I mean, whether it's a run one or a one where you deploy UPF or a Mac one, or it doesn't really matter at the end. It's a cluster, right? So now, in order to provision that cluster, we have an architecture where at the moment, we have a Git repo that is that holds all the configuration elements that are actuated upon that edge cluster, right? So as a result, when we instantiate a cluster, we need to have a Git repo, we need to have secrets to access it, we need to install a bunch of software on that edge cluster to, for example, we use config sync as a GitOps tooling at the moment. So there is, so when I'm talking about the enablement or the automation of instantiating that workload cluster, it's encompassing all of that. So in other words, you basically push a button, if you will, and then you say, I need 5 clusters, and 5 clusters appear, and they have their own Git repo, they have their own secrets that are being provisioned, and what have you, right? So that's the whole flow that happens. The way that we are working is tomorrow we have a session, so we probably can go into more details there, but we work with the concept of packages. So we have a package of cluster API with a provider being Docker and kind clusters, right? So if let's say we want to enable, let's say bare metal, what needs to happen is someone needs to build a package for bare metal provisioning with the artifacts that are associated with that. And then we have to see whether there are any specific things that we need in order to integrate with that. So like the installation of the software packages, the secret management and stuff like that. But typically, I'm expecting that a lot of that is shielded or abstracted away by the fact that we are using cluster API. But unless you go into all the details, okay, that's why I'm saying we are exercising the Docker provider with kind. So we have not exercised others at the moment, just to see whether there are anything in particular that are specific to those providers that are specific, or if it's generic, that we can reuse the components that we have built already. You see, so that's the subtlety of the details that we have to figure out. But we have abstracted at the moment, let's say with cluster API, but we are consuming it straight away. So we have not really built an abstraction layer in it. That's something we are planning to do, but at the moment it's like we call it natively, if you will. Okay. Our ambition is to make it generic, right? But at the moment it is not. Okay. Any more questions on this?
Yeah, so maybe putting the cluster API question aside for a moment, I'm wondering in terms of what Nephio can do for SCNF, the current capabilities, are you focused on just kind of day 0, day 1, or is there any day 2 capabilities as well, like configuration of the network function during its life cycle?
So that second bullet, not so much. We are demonstrating in at least a few, but it's basically what happens is that we can do, for example, one of the demos that we will do is changing the capacity of a free 5GC to basically give it higher bandwidth or higher capacity. But yeah, so the implementation at free 5GC, you cannot change it automatically, so it will restart itself. You see? So that's what the operator of free 5GC does. So it restarts the thing, but so we don't have a full, if you look to Nephio, we have 3 swim lanes, right? The left one, which is the infra, the middle one, which is the, let's call it the lifecycle management, and the third one, which is the configuration. On the configuration side, we haven't done almost anything at the moment.
Okay, I think no need to apologize, just to get an idea of I think you were talking about maybe
Yeah,
these
that one on the
3.
right. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, the 3. Yes, correct. Yeah. So the one on the right, which is the configuration management, right? So where you have let's say a running network function or CNF, and you want to change the configuration of it. For example, you add a slice or something like that. That's something we haven't done.
Okay, understood. We all have to crawl before we walk and so on. So no
Yes.
problem with that.
Yeah.
I see. Okay. So now the next thing, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, for free 5GC. So for free 5GC, we have mainly focused on 3 components of the whole core, which is UPF, SMF, AMF. We are using the other components like NRF, USF, ISO, the whole core, but so those are not really lifecycle management. We have a package that contains them, and we instantiate all of those components, and they run, if you will, on one of those clusters. Okay, so we are using it, but we are not, we are instantiating it, but we are not managing them whatsoever. So we're just getting them running. But for the SMF and UPF and AMF, there is more lifecycle activities that we can consume. So basically, we can decide where they run. We install them. We basically give them initial configuration. There is so the way you configure them is flexible. So in other words, if you, I don't know how the super blueprint is designed in terms of the, let's say, networking that you are using under the hood. So what we are typically using is we use the default Kubernetes network for any service-based communication. And then we are using for, let's say, the N1, N2, N3, we are using dedicated networks that we are managing towards Multus, with Multus, and then we are automating and orchestrating them. And we are, yeah, so we have flexibility there, although we are testing with a specific configuration. The interaction between the infra as well as the network functions with respect to the infra, we have flexibility in theory to accommodate different types of environments. Whether you use SRIOV or MAC VLAN, IP VLAN doesn't really matter for us. So we can support these things. Yeah, and so basically, yeah, so we can give certain specific configuration parameters, but so the way we manage that is through packages. And so we provide that information towards the relevant network functions. And mainly to lifecycle management, but the configuration itself is kind of the day 0 or the initial config.
Okay, I think we don't have any, as I said, of the experts from the current 5G Super Blueprint lab, so I don't know what CNI multiplexing is used. So it sounds like there needs to be a discussion about the next level of details about the infrastructure, but unfortunately, we don't have the right people right here. So probably we should follow up on that on one of the upcoming 5G Super Blueprint meetings.
Yeah. Yeah, referring back to the ONAP discussions, ONAP requires the API of Multus practically. So if you are compliant with RC2, that practically means multus for C9 multiplexer.
Yeah, so that's what we. So I don't know what you mean exactly, but so basically, how it works is the following, right? So we create a package. So the architecture of Nephio is the following: is you do a design and you create basically a package that basically says I have a UPF, and for this particular design, I use these networks and I use these CNIs and so on and so forth, right? And the same you do for SMF, the same you do for AMF, right? Then what happens is on the management cluster, so it's on the central side, we basically hydrate, based on the parameters, we give it IP addresses, VLANs, and the whole shebang, right? And at the moment, then you are going to deployment, and what we generate during that, in that management cluster with specialization and so on and so forth, we are generating the NED, so the network attachment definition that Multus is using eventually to instantiate the network function. So we are generating the full spec, as well as we are generating a custom resource that is consumed by the Free5GC operator. So for example, we are generating an SMF deployment CR or a AMF deployment CR and a UPF deployment CR, which has the specifics of that instantiation. And what happens is that the Multus CRs gets consumed by Multus, and then the operator of the Free5GC consumes that deployment CR together with the Multus to basically instantiate the network function as such. So in other words, the workload, so the workload cluster, so when the network function runs, you actually have a Multus implementation out of the box. Does that clarify? Quickly?
Clear for me. Yeah, sorry, I was finding the unmute.
No worries.
Okay, if there are no more questions about, and thanks, Wim, I know we didn't prepare you for that, so thanks for stepping up. If there are no questions, I want to see if we can maybe figure out some more information about what ONAP capabilities might be relevant for the 5G Super Blueprint. We heard this morning about the use of SO for the end-to-end orchestration, but there are some ONAP capabilities around slice management. I was wondering if somebody is able to kind of walk us through these capabilities and what might be relevant for the 5G Super Blueprint. If not, we can park that and get back to it in maybe one of our upcoming 5G Super Blueprint meetings.
Hi, Rani, this is Yogen.
Hi.
Yeah, I can give some subset of it, which we have done it in the 5G Super Blueprint. In the previous one, I think that could be some introduction there. I've not been on the very latest ONAP slicing one, but till the release I was slightly following it up. So keeping on that front, right? So ONAP slicing has a notion of use case UI, right? That's the place from where an operator can actually provide the set of attributes which is required for the slicing, right? And then basically that is the interface to the operator to tell what kind of slicing he's looking at it, right? And from there it actually breaks down and it reaches to the SO component, and SO has essentially the CSMF and SMF and all the adapters for your core RAN and the transport NSSMF, right? And that's all of them is packaged in one SO big component, right? And each of them is then is actually responsible to do all the due diligence for in order to take this characteristics of the slice which has been fed by the operator through the use case UI, and then break down to a network slice management function attributes, and then further it breaks down to the respective domains of RAN, transport, and the core, and then it offloads to the orchestrator to do the due diligence of bringing it down. So we never saw end to end where the RAN, core, and the transport, everything is being demonstrated, but we saw it in previous 5G Super Blueprint. We demonstrated the core slicing portion through one of the vendor specific stack, which we did it in the VCO 3.0 demo portion, if I remember, but the RAN was not done anytime. So that is some prior art on where the ONAP slicing was, and I think it was evolving period by period. And they have a couple of architecture where you can use option 1 or option 2. Option 1 was something which is internal to the ONAP itself, which means you're going to implement the NSSMF and all the components internally and will be consuming it. And the option 2 architecture was primarily where you can have your NSSMFs being external, and which is more practical also because anybody who wants to use it will actually has to write their NSSMF and then integrate with the end vendor stack. So that's primarily the ONAP slicing is all about.
Yeah, thanks for the recap. I guess that if we want to do RAN slicing, it really depends on what we use for the RAN. And as I mentioned, the current RAN that we have in the lab is the GXC one, so I'm not sure whether they have slicing capabilities, and I'm pretty sure that even if they do, it was never integrated with ONAP, so there's a challenge there. So kind of, I don't see Seshu here, but it sounds like there are potential pieces of ONAP that could be integrated with the 5G Super Blueprint and provide richer functionality than what we have today. I just, since we maybe don't have all the relevant parties here on this call, I'm wondering how we can kind of move this thing forward, and what would be the right platform and who would be the right people to move it forward. We have, of course, our bi-weekly 5G Super Blueprint meetings where we keep track of the existing implementation and also discuss future one. LJ, do you think that would be the right platform to continue this, or?
Yeah, we might go there. We can also perhaps get some of the folks from UNH and Kaloom, as well as Nephio, and some of the key contributors and 5G Super Blueprint together on a perhaps a second call specifically to sort of follow up on this session. That's another option.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like we are missing a quorum for all the right participants today. So I think the main action item is to make sure we have in one room or in one call the UNH, Kaloom, from the lab side, someone from Nephio, and someone maybe who is familiar with the ONAP capabilities. I know that, again, don't want to put anybody on the spot, but I know the folks from Infosys kind of offered to be part of it. So I'm counting on you guys to also be part of that discussion, since you have experience with both ONAP and currently with Nephio.
So Randy, let's you and I get together afterwards, try to determine who the best participants would be to move this forward. And on any of the given bi-weekly calls, we may or may not have all the participants. That's why I'm thinking maybe start off with a dedicated meeting, and then we can bring it into the overall general meeting. once it sort of gets, it moves forward a little bit. That's sort of my thoughts.
Can I ask a sort of a related question? And this is, unfortunately, Seshi's not on this session. I was really hoping he would be here for this discussion, but sort of based on the presentation that he gave before the break and this discussion here, how aligned do you think is that sort of, kind of architecture with ONAP and Nephio and Aniket and Silva and, sort of, the reusable sort of, IMS that, depending on if you use, Helm or KPT should be reusable, some of the concepts from that earlier presentation, how aligned is that, Rani and other 5G SBP folks here aligned with the goals of what we're trying to execute and implement in 5G Super Blueprint, right now? Is it aligned, and what we need is to actually execute, sort of going back to Gergely's question on Aniket, that we need a little bit more, people with project specific subject matter expertise to help us, is it an extension of that, but still core to the philosophy? Is that something that you can maybe comment on for our folks who've, kind of been listening to both, I think, really interesting presentations and now in this kind of discussion?
Yeah, just a quick question. I see some hands raised, but quick answer. The 5G Super Blueprint is a platform where the questions of how do you build and operate a network are answered. So there is no strict overarching architecture or something like that we adhere to. I mean, based on the use cases and based on the tools that are available, we build a solution that works. So we welcome all kinds of approaches. I think, referring to your question about what we've heard earlier this morning, I think it's pretty much aligned. My kind of concern, it's not really a concern, but I think what we need to do is, Seshu presented a few options there, so we need to start somewhere and start implementing this. There's more than one way to go there. So I think the next level of details will be to figure out where to start and which of the paths that Seshu showed we will start on the implementation side. But in general, to your question, I think the architecture he presented is very much aligned with where we see the 5G Super Blueprint going.
Right. So it's sort of taking this discussion and some of what Seshu is presenting and basically start the rolling up your sleeves phase of the activity to start experimenting, implementing, and answering some questions and perhaps uncovering new ones.
Yeah. And see, Wim, you have a question?
Yeah, so for me, I mean, the thing is the following, right? I mean, if I look at an O-Cloud versus a cloud for the core, I don't see it. There will be a few probably nuances, but for the most part, it's the same. So the challenge that we have, in my view, is, okay, so if you look at the core of what was presented was, let's use Kubernetes and operators. It's like basically the same as what Nephio is saying, right? The challenge that we have, I think, right now is, and it's the same. I had some conversation with Silva, right? Because they are also doing cluster management at the end of the day, right? So I think what would be important to do is to find or to define who does what in this in this journey, because the thing is the following. Or at the end of the day, I mean, what I would hate to see is that we have an O-Cloud specific implementation to manage infrastructure. That would be really bad, in my view. Right. So what we should do is to see in Nephio at the moment we are using certain, let's say, construct, like as I said before, cluster API. So we defined that because there is a known implementation and we can use it. My hope, for example, of Silva is they will basically be the ones that actually in LF or LFN do the full cluster management with all the bells and whistles. once that is available, I believe we should adhere to something like that, right? Or maybe something else, right? But what I'm trying to say is that there should be one entity who holds the responsibility of a certain aspect, and
Right.
then the other should integrate with that, because otherwise what you'll see is it's a maze, and I will end up with 20 different things, which basically all do the same thing, with a slight variation.
Yeah, it's a good comment. I
Yeah.
think the best way I see to resolve that is to start building things and showing by
Correct.
demonstration, or do what we call sometimes a duocracy, because as you well aware, Silva, Nephio, some of the other elephant are basically peer communities, and there's no overarching authority. So I don't think somebody or some organization can determine who does what. It should be built from the ground up by these kind of demonstrations. And the 5G super blueprint is one of the, I think, the best opportunities to kind of show de facto how things could be done. It's also a learning experience. We don't have to get it right the first time. We can try a few things and see what sticks. So let's prioritize working on things over finding the optimal architecture first, so we can do a broad strokes kind of architecture, figure out what we think should be done, and then try to build it under the 5G super blueprint, and then take the feedback back to our communities and figure out what needs to happen next.
Ronnie, in my opinion, that should just lay out what's the current landscape. I agree that it's too many options, it's too confusing, but we need to talk about, this is open source, vendor can choose the path, but we, as a reference implementation, reference architecture, maybe we can guide what's the best option. So I'm definitely interested in that conversation, right? You can add me in there.
Yeah, sure.
Also, then if I may, I mean, I see the super blueprint really as a good, let's say, leverage to help achieve this, right? Because, I mean, if the super blueprint basically says, okay, this is the most common denominator on how 5G or maybe going forward 6G or whatever is deployed, and you have reference implementations that show how to do so, I think it's a good thing even for all the projects to adhere to or to help and drive with respect to use cases, right? Because what you see, I can speak from Nephio, although I have personally quite some experience myself, but I'm not saying that is the only experience that exists. There is many others. There is a lack of that in these projects, and it is super important. And having more, let's say, feedback or cross communication around that, I think would help all of us.
Yeah, well, and I think, as I said this morning, my opening plenary, I think this is a topic that I think is beyond any specific project or any specific initiative that I really want us to talk about in the town hall. But yeah, I mean, it's very clear, because I think, what we don't want to do, and I think this is what Randy is saying, is spend a year, just on paper talking about ideal infrastructure or ideal architectures and ideal, folks, like, this is exactly your lane, stay in there, right? Without doing, that's one extreme that I think is bad, right? That's sort of a very old school standardization mentality, and then I think there's, sort of, the other end of the danger, which is, there's no coordination, there's no oversight, and there's poor communication. So we end up with a lot of point things that don't integrate, and there's not sort of, a high level view. And, we obviously need to aim for a, middle path, which I think is sometimes more art than science, more art than engineering, in fact, which is sometimes difficult for the group of us assembled here. But, I think that's where we need to get to, so that we're not impacting implementation, right? That we are rolling up our sleeves and uncovering things through implementation as opposed to, PowerPoint, but that, we're not so siloed as perhaps we have, become a little bit too much. I don't know if other people have opinions, like where we live on that spectrum. Like, are we too bureaucratic or are we too siloed? All right, a question either folks don't have an answer to or don't wish to answer, which is fine. We can move on to someone else's sort of thoughts and opinions here.
Feel free to send Heather a private message if you want.
Yeah. I get all sorts of emails with opinions in them.
Yeah, just to kind of remind everyone that the 5G Super Blueprint was created to create that environment where things can be done and things can be demonstrated and created by means of experimenting and doing things, and not by just standing in front of a whiteboard and talking about things, but actually by doing things and learning from that and keep improving. I mean, my point is we don't have to get it right the first time. It's better to get something working than not get nothing at all. Okay, so it sounds like we probably should.
I had a quick question. So the people in I'm not yes, the reason I didn't answer your question, Heather, is because I'm not familiar enough with all the things. But so my question is the following: in Super Blueprint, who is driving the architecture that you are going to design towards? But because for me, what is important is that it's a representation of what our customers want, right? And what the field would use, right? So that's, I think, a very important aspect, and that it's endorsed by a set of, let's call it, operators to endorse that. If that's, let's say, the basis on which you build, then proving that out, I think is, on that basis, there should be a vehicle to help demonstrate and prove the things.
Yeah, so we have the concept of use cases under the 5G Super Blueprint, which are driven by the end customers. But then, as I said, the implementation is driven by whoever comes and works on the deployment. So we have no control. I mean, we welcome anyone to take part in that effort and bring the implementation that they see fit. So if people are passionate or opinionated about some way to solve things, I more than encourage them to come to the 5G Super Blueprint, to the meeting and workspaces, and start building that implementation they believe is the right one.
Okay. Ronnie, quick question. Is the Magma integration ONAP is the 5G Blueprint use case?
Magma was there in the early days,
right.
Since the features related to 5G were not prioritized by the Magma community. It was pretty much replaced, and free, as I said, free 5GC is currently the main packet core implementation, and SD core is kind of the one we also want to see become part of the blueprint.
Thank you, because I saw the SD core and the 5G, but I didn't see the Magma decently. That's why. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so if there are no more questions or comments, I think we could adjourn here, and probably we'll need to follow up on some of the action items on the bi-weekly 5G Super Blueprint meeting. So LJ and I will follow up on that. Okay, thanks everyone.
Thanks everyone.